When we talk about Nazi UFOs, we are referring to advanced spacecraft that Nazi Germany attempted to develop before and during World War II. Some even believe that former Nazi scientists continue to develop new flying saucers in secret underground bunkers in Antarctica, South America, or the United States to this day. Such aircraft often appear in science fiction, conspiracy theories, and underground comics, but also in more than a few documentaries and history magazines. While there is no official evidence to support the Nazi spacecraft theory, it is often associated with esoteric Nazism, an ideology that posits the possibility of a restoration of the Nazi regime through supernatural or paranormal means. These aircraft probably originated from advanced German technology in specialized engines, such as Viktor Schauberger's Repulsine during the Second World War. However, the stories and myths about Nazi UFOs contain incontrovertible truths, which is a good place to start to have a complete and in-depth overview of the subject. Nazi Germany claimed the territory of New Swabia in Antarctica as early as 1938 by sending a large expedition that settled there. Nazi Germany researched advanced propulsion technologies, including ballistic missiles, the development of new and more powerful engines based on the work of Viktor Schauberger, ultra-high-speed aircraft, and Arthur Sachs' experimental AS-6 flying saucer. Some UFO sightings during the Second World War, in particular those known as Foo Fighters, were discovered to be prototypes of Nazi aircraft already capable, at that time, of disturbing the Allies' military aircraft using electromagnetic disturbances, a technology similar to today's electromagnetic pulse weapons, EMPs. In the course of this documentary, we will deepen each of these aspects and theories. Naturally, it is good to start from the beginning. That is, when, for the first time, rumours and theories began to circulate about Nazi Germany's secret projects for the construction of flying saucers. Indeed, there is compelling evidence that as early as the beginning of the 1930s, the technology and presence of one or more extraterrestrial races became known to the leaders of Nazi Germany, who undertook an ambitious effort to communicate with these races for the purpose of acquiring their advanced technology. Using communication techniques that today would be referred to as psychic channeling techniques, there is overwhelming evidence that some Nazi occult societies specializing in this form of communication with these ET races were successful in their mission, and thus gained a degree of knowledge such as to produce rapid technological advances that ended up attracting the attention of the secret services of Great Britain, France, the USSR, and the United States. Each of these large states took pains to obtain any information on Nazi communication methods with one or more ET races, while monitoring the technology of extraterrestrial origin developed by the Third Reich. In fact, the fascination that Adolf Hitler felt towards the occult sciences and esoteric philosophies is well known, which led him to consider and then to exploit any possibility of access to the development of military and industrial technologies that would have allowed Nazi Germany to conquer the place which it deserved, according to Hitler, as a leading global power. Hitler himself became interested in methods of interspatial communication, such as, for example, psychic channeling, thanks to which an individual could establish communication with non-physical and/or distant life forms and transmit and receive information. This method was born from the work of mystics such as Helena Blavatsky, who wrote numerous essays on how to develop these communication skills with other life forms. While such a phenomenon in the contemporary era struggles to be taken seriously by the general public, there is irrefutable evidence that not only did Hitler take it seriously, but he devoted considerable resources of the Nazi state to converting the information gained from these efforts into technological development and the production of weapons. Much of the information obtained through these psychic communications led, in the run-up to World War II, to Nazi expeditions to remote locations such as Tibet, Antarctica, South America, Iraq, and elsewhere in search of buried extraterrestrial artifacts. One of the major occult societies Hitler backed was the Vril Society, which allegedly channeled messages from an alien civilization in the Aldebaran solar system, and also planned to develop a craft capable of making physical contact with that civilization. Another significant occult group was the Thule Society, that claimed to be in communication with an advanced race, rather than an extraterrestrial race from outside our solar system. They were an ancient Earth civilization that inhabited subterranean territories accessible from the polar regions and other isolated areas of the planet. The seriousness and support given by Hitler to these communications is testified by the material support given to these occult societies in terms of scientific resources for the development of their ET-inspired technologies. In 1934, for example, the Vril Society had apparently developed its first UFO-shaped aircraft, known as Vril 1, which was propelled by an anti-gravity effect. While there was predictable skepticism from the more traditional branches of the German military about the feasibility of such designs, the Nazi SS were at the forefront of efforts to develop this technology. Later, during World War II, the Nazi SS would assume complete control of Hitler's scientific military occult complex, ensuring the highest level of secrecy in the development and operation of extraterrestrial-inspired technology. The first official statement on Nazi flying saucers can be found in an article that appeared in the Italian newspaper Il Giornale d'Italia at the beginning of 1950, written by Professor Giuseppe Belluzzo, an Italian scientist and former Italian Minister of National Economy under Mussolini's regime. Professor Belluzzo claimed that flying saucer prototypes had been designed and studied in Germany and Italy as early as 1942. Belluzzo also said that other major military powers are working on flying saucer designs. After a few days, the German engineer Rudolf Shriever gave an interview to the German magazine Der Spiegel in which he confirmed Belluzzo's statements and elaborated, stating that he had designed an aircraft powered by a circular system of rotating turbine blades with a diameter of 15 meters. He claimed that the design had been developed by him and his team at the BMW works in Prague, starting in April 1945 when he fled Czechoslovakia. His flying saucer designs were stolen from his Bremerhaven Lehrherr workshop in 1948, and he was convinced that it was Czech agents who had then delivered his designs to an enemy foreign power, without indicating which. In 1953, when Avro Canada, a Canadian aircraft manufacturing company, announced it was developing the VZ-9AV Avro car, a circular jet aircraft with an estimated speed of 2,400 km per hour, German engineer Georg Klein stated that such designs had been developed during the Third Reich and then stolen and delivered to other nations, such as Canada. Klein said there were two different designs of German flying saucers. The first was a non-rotating disc developed in Breslau by V2 rocket engineer Richard Miete. He was first captured by the Soviets, then he managed to escape and take refuge first in the United States and finally in Canada, where he ended up working for Avro, precisely because he was in possession of these German military secrets. The second was a disc developed by Rudolf Shriever and Klaus Habermohl in Prague, which consisted of a system of blades powered by a turbine moving around a stationary cockpit. Klein claimed to have witnessed the maiden flight of this manned craft on February 14, 1945, when the object climbed to 41,000 feet in about 3 minutes and reached a flying speed of 2,200 kilometers per hour. British aeronautical engineer Roy Fedden, designer of many of the most commercially successful aero engines during the years of the Second World War, confirmed that the only engines that could approach the capabilities attributed to flying saucers were those designed by the Germans towards the end of the war. Fedden stated in 1945, "I have seen enough of their designs to realize that if they could prolong the war a few months, we should be faced with a series of entirely new and lethal, for us, developments in air warfare." Fedden also added that the Germans were working on a number of highly unusual aeronautical projects, though he did not elaborate on his claim. In 1959, Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, editor of the US Air Force's Project Blue Book, wrote, "At the end of World War II, the Germans had several types of aircraft and guided missiles under development. Most of them were in the more preliminary stages, but they were the only known aircraft capable of approaching the performance of objects reported by UFO observers." The book Les Matins des Magiciens, a 1967 text by Louis Powell and Jacques Begier, contains many spectacular statements about the Vril Society of Berlin, a society we will discuss later in the documentary. Several years later, some writers, including Jan van Helsing, Norbert Jürgen Radhofer, and Vladimir Terziski, built on their work, linking the Vril Society to UFOs. Among their claims is that the society may have come into contact with an alien race and would be dedicated to creating spaceships to reach the aliens. In collaboration with the Thule Society and the Nazi Party, the Vril Society developed a number of prototype flying saucers. With the defeat of the Nazis, the society would retreat to a base in Antarctica and officially disappear. Terziski, a Bulgarian engineer who calls himself president of the American Academy of Dissident Sciences, argues that the Germans collaborated in advanced aircraft research with the Axis powers Italy and Japan, and continued their space efforts after the war from their base in Antarctica. He argues that the Germans may have landed on the moon as early as 1942 and established an underground base there. Terziski says that when the Russians and Americans secretly landed on the moon in the 1950s, they stayed at this still operating base. According to Terziski, there is atmosphere, water and vegetation on the moon, which NASA hides to exclude the Third World from lunar exploration. When German denier Ernst Zundel founded the Samizdat publishing house in the 1970s, he initially targeted the UFO community, which was then at the peak of public acceptance. His books claimed that flying saucers were secret Nazi weapons launched from an underground base in Antarctica, from which the Nazis hoped to conquer the world and eventually the planets. Zundel also sold, for about $10,000, seats on a scouting party to locate the entrance to the base. However, some interviewees claimed that Zundel privately admitted that it was a hoax, deliberately created to get money and visibility, but Zundel continued to defend his views until 2002. In 1978, Miguel Serrano, a Chilean diplomat and Nazi sympathizer, published the book The Golden Band, in which he claimed that Adolf Hitler was an avatar of Vishnu, and that, in that moment, he was communicating with the Hyperborean deities in a secret underground base in Antarctica. Serrano said Hitler would lead a fleet of UFOs from the base to found the Fourth Reich. In popular culture, this alleged fleet of UFOs is referred to as the Nazi flying saucers of Antarctica. Nick Cook, an esteemed aviation journalist working for Jane's Defense Weekly, examined the revelations of German flying saucers in his 2001 book, The Hunt for Zero Point. Cook became interested in unconventional aircraft after seeing articles written in the 1950s that quoted influential experts of the time, such as Lawrence D. Bell, whose company had designed the supersonic X-1, who predicted that the next great discovery in the field of aviation would have been represented by anti-gravity devices. His research led him to Lussar's book and the stories of German flying saucers. Cook was perhaps one of the few experienced aviation writers willing to take seriously what many regarded as the legend of German flying saucers. While researching his book, he visited many of the places mentioned in the book German Secret Weapons of World War II. He also linked the stories of German flying saucer designers to the work of a man called Viktor Schauberger. Schauberger, born in Austria in 1885, was considered by many to be insane. Schauberger himself said, "They call me crazy. The hope is that they are right." Although his professional training was as a member of the forestry department, Cook, after visiting Schauberger's nephew and examining his records and the machinery he had built, concluded that Schauberger was in fact an engineer. Schauberger believed that machines could be better designed to go with the flow of nature, rather than against it. One of Schauberger's projects was to design a flying saucer-shaped aircraft that used a vortex propulsion system. His theory was that if water or air is swirled in a tortuous form of oscillation known as a colloid, a buildup of energy is obtained, which, with immense power, can cause levitation. According to some accounts, Schauberger built several models, one of which had a diameter of nearly 5 feet and was powered by a very powerful electric motor. Some reports confirm that one of the models actually flew. In an echo of Shriever's flying saucer story, Schauberger wrote to a friend that a full-scale prototype of one of his designs was built using the labour of inmates at the Morhausen concentration camp. This aircraft flew on February 19, 1945, near Prague, and reached an altitude of 45,000 feet in just 3 minutes. The letter goes on to say that the prototype was destroyed by the Nazis before it could be captured by the Allied forces. After the war, Schauberger moved to the United States, where according to some, he worked on secret projects for the American government. He died in 1958 after repeatedly claiming that his ideas had been stolen. Cook concluded that if the stories about Schauberger's work were true, and apparently they were, his devices should be able to harness the force of anti-gravity. The legend of German flying saucers is fascinating, but is it true? It certainly seems likely that there was experimentation with this concept within the Reich, as well as in the United States. Disc-shaped aircraft have several advantages, including a low stall speed and low drag, even at high speeds. The rounded shape can also reduce the aircraft's radar profile, making it stealth. The low stall speed and low drag of this shape would have been of particular interest to the Germans late in the war. Months of bombing had reduced the German runways to rubble. A saucer-shaped aircraft could have lifted off the ground with a short runway or even performed a vertical takeoff and landing without any runway at all. In his book, Cook concludes that Nazi flying saucer technology was appropriated by the United States and the Soviet Union at the end of the war. This statement is entirely true, as it is now clear that US and USSR rocket development in the 1950s and 1960s owes much to German scientists. Indeed, many German engineers, smuggled into the United States through Operation Paperclip, aided the United States in its space program and in its Cold War fight against the Soviet Union. Similarly, according to author Jim Wilson in an article in Popular Mechanics in July 1997, there are documents suggesting that at least two people, the brothers Walter and Reimar Horten, were wanted by the United States after the war because of their participation in German military flying saucer programs. In the first half of the 20th century, Hitler and the Third Reich led Europe into a decade of terror that culminated in World War II. Industrial and military technology played a major role in that war compared to past conflicts, and the Germans quickly developed an incredible array of secret weapons. Were flying saucers part of the Luftwaffe's arsenal? And if so, was this secret looted and used by the Allied victors after the war? More than any previous war, World War II was the war of secret weapons. Some of these, such as the American atomic bomb and the British ability to decipher German communications codes, may have actually changed the outcome of the conflict. Even the Axis powers had their secrets, and many of Germany's most clandestine wartime technical advances are well known today. Hitler's forces flew the first military jet, the German Heinkel 178, in 1939. In 1943, the Germans also flew the only fighter jet that entered regular service during the war, the Messerschmitt 262. This Me-262 was able to easily outrun the fastest Allied aircraft, and only Hitler's erroneous order to equip the aircraft as defensive fighters and not bombers saved the Allied aircraft from devastating losses. Cruise missiles, a staple of today's advanced arsenals, were also first used by the Third Reich during the war. V-1 flying bombs were launched from German-held territories across the English Channel. The buzz bombs, as they were sometimes called due to the sound of their pulse jet engines, could outrun most Allied aircraft, making the V-1s nearly impossible to stop. The V-1's weak point was its guidance system, a problem solved in modern cruise missiles through the use of remotely controlled radars. Not being able to hit a precise target, the V-1 could only be used to cause random terror, and not to hit truly important military targets. The German V-2 rocket was the predecessor of the intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that filled the nuclear arsenals of the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War. It travelled up to 225 miles at 5 times the speed of sound, and a single shot could demolish an entire city block. During the war, the V-2 killed 2,724 civilians and wounded 6,467 others. Like the V-1, however, it lacked a guidance system that would allow it to effectively strike specific targets. Hitler's engineers also developed a rocket-powered jet, the Me-163. Although it never entered regular service, it was the first aircraft to fly at more than 600 miles per hour. After the war, rumours surfaced that the Nazis had another still hidden secret weapon, saucer-shaped flying aircraft. According to these stories, some of the victorious Allied nations had looted the German laboratories where these aircraft were being developed, and covert testing of these devices explained many of the reports of flying saucers appearing in the United States and the Soviet Union in the 1950s. Many of the reports of Nazi flying saucers can be traced back to a book called German Secret Weapons of World War II, written by Rudolf Lussar in the late 1950s. Lussar had been a major in a German army technical unit during the war. His book covered many of the recognized advances, such as the V-1 and V-2, but also included a chapter on wonder weapons. According to Lusar, a German aircraft designer named Rudolf Shriever, along with fellow engineers Habermal, Mieth and Belanzo, was working on several saucer-shaped aircraft towards the end of the war. At a plant near Breslau, Poland, a group led by Mieth built a prototype circular air vehicle 137 feet in diameter with a dome for the cockpit. The aircraft was to be powered by adjustable jet engines. According to Lusar's account, the device was destroyed when the plant in which it was built was blown up by retreating German troops, before it could be overrun by the Soviets in 1945. According to Lusar, at a second location just outside Prague, another group, led by Shriever and Habermal, was working on an additional saucer aircraft. The diagrams included in the book show an egg-shaped central control pod surrounded by a nearly flat disc. The flat disc appears to be composed of blades that rotate to create lift. Ports on the underside of the capsule appear to be connected to jet engines that provide forward propulsion. Lusar says Shriever's machine was tested in 1945 and supposedly reached an altitude of 39,000 feet in just over 3 minutes. He goes on to say that it had a top speed of 2,000 km per hour, substantially faster than the speed of sound. According to Lusar, the Germans had also developed unconventional and automated small aircraft. One version was called the Führerball, while another, capable of taking off vertically, was called the Kugelblitz. According to stories, these aircraft were only armed with devices designed to be guided towards Allied aircraft and interfere with their electronics and engines. These, then, were some of the best known German advances in the military. However, there were also hints of darker technologies that were not fully understood. It was in 1944 that knowledge of these secret weapons first became public, when the December 14th New York Times headline was "Floating Mystery Ball is New German Weapon." Members of the US Air Force reported seeing silver spheres in the sky over German territory. A veteran pilot of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron was flying a mission over Hagenau, Germany, on December 22, 1944, when at 6 a.m., while flying at an altitude of 10,000 feet, the pilot and his radar operator saw two great orange flares climb rapidly towards them. "Once we reached our altitude," the pilot reported, "the objects leveled off and stuck to my wake. The pilot went into a dive and the flares followed him with great accuracy. He veered as sharply as possible and the objects followed. For 2 minutes these lights followed the fighter in several intricate maneuvers, then suddenly went out." The purpose of these strange objects was a mystery, as they merely tracked warplanes, but apparently never opened fire or otherwise attacked them. These objects were called Foo Fighters, and both sides involved in the war seemed to believe that the Foo Fighters were their enemies' inventions, and several reconnaissance missions were launched to get more information. To this day, the origins of Foo Fighters remain a historical enigma. What was clear, however, was that this was not human technology, and this was a serious cause for concern. Trying to discern fact from fiction after all these years is not easy, and we are forced to consider information that is largely unverifiable. However, a plausible story about Nazi flying saucers begins to emerge. One person who has made claims regarding the development of flying saucers in Nazi Germany is former Luftwaffe flight captain and aircraft designer Rudolf Shriever. In 1950, he claimed that he and a small team had been working at facilities near Prague, developing a flying saucer vehicle. This story first appeared in the magazine Der Spiegel on March 30th, 1950, in which Rudolf Shriever stated that he had already experimented with flying saucer designs in the early 1940s and would be willing to build one for the United States in 6 to 9 months maximum. Shriever, a 40-year-old Prague University graduate at the time, said he had already made plans for such a machine, which he calls a flying top, before the collapse of Germany, and that the plans were stolen from his laboratory. His assertions are supported by an international report of the Luftfahrt of 1975, which communicated that after the death of Shriever, which occurred in the late 1950s, among the documents found in his possession there were notes for the design of a large flying saucer. Until his death, Shriever had repeatedly stated that UFO sightings since the end of the war were proof that his original ideas had been carried forward with positive results. We certainly know that a scientist, Viktor Schauberger, was involved in the production of flying saucers, and that he flew one in 1945 near Prague, just as Shriever had claimed. His experimental prototypes were based on levitation. His work attracted Hitler's attention, and it is Schauberger's son who recounts the meeting between his father and Hitler. In June 1934, my father was invited by the Chancellor of the Reich, Adolf Hitler, to discuss his work. Hitler wanted to learn about his discoveries and talk about the various possibilities of application on the military level. Hitler wanted Schauberger to supervise the construction of a new aircraft that could levitate without burning fuel. The idea for this new craft was based on a discovery made by Schauberger a few years earlier on how to develop an atomic level low pressure zone. The scientist claimed to have achieved this during a test in his laboratory when he managed to generate a force thanks to a drop in temperature. Schauberger called this resultant force diamagnetic levitation power and noted that in nature it was possible to see examples of this reactionary force in meteorology and solar fusion stability. Schauberger asked for and obtained a team of scientists to help him in his work and insisted that they be treated as free men rather than Nazi prisoners. Unfortunately, however, the headquarters where they worked was bombed and they were all transferred to Leonstein. There they perfected Schauberger's turbine-powered flying saucer that spun in the air in a tortuous type of oscillation that caused immense power to build up that caused levitation. Schauberger's prototype was then developed into a vehicle known as the Beluzzo-Shriever Miete Discus, a vehicle as large as 22 feet in diameter. In 1945, they could reach over 2,000 kilometers an hour and gain an altitude of 40,000 feet in under 3 minutes. It was also noted that the craft glowed blue and green as it took off, leaving a silvery trail behind it. In an article published in a Munich newspaper in 1956, it was written that Viktor Schauberger had been the inventor of a new driving force, which, with the use of air and water alone, generated light, heat, and movement. The publication reported that the first unmanned flying saucer was tested in 1945 near Prague, which could hover motionless in the air and fly as fast backwards as it could forwards. It was also reported to have a diameter of 50 meters. Other evidence supporting this event had already appeared in an interview given on November 18, 1954, to the Tagesanzeiger in Zurich. A certain George Klein stated that he witnessed a flying saucer test on February 14, 1945, and that the craft had reached an altitude of 30,000 feet in 3 minutes and could travel hundreds of miles per hour. In the interview, Klein provided further insight into the developments behind the discs, stating that some of the work had taken place in Peenemünde, where the V2 rocket was under development and where Wernher von Braun was director. Klein also claimed that the aircraft's stability had been achieved by using a gyroscope, the same method used by the von Braun-Dornberger team. The research then moved to the underground facilities of Mittelwerk, near Nordhausen, in the Harz Mountains. Even the book Brighter Than a Thousand Suns, considered by many to be the Bible of the history of the development of the atomic bomb, confirmed these events. In fact, within the text, it is said that the first of these flying saucers, circular in shape, with a diameter of about 45 yards, was built by the specialists Shriever, Habermal and Miet, and took off for the first time on February 14, 1945, near Prague, reaching a height of nearly 8 miles in 3 minutes with a top speed of 1,250 miles per hour, which was doubled in subsequent tests. Furthermore, that these events actually occurred is also supported by former CIA agent Virgil Armstrong, who officially stated that the US government and the CIA did not believe that Nazi Germany had a secret weapon at its disposal, at least at the beginning of the war, until they discovered that Hitler not only had a secret weapon, but he also had what we would call today a UFO or spaceship. They already had one capable of reaching 1,200 miles per hour, with vertical takeoff and able to make 90-degree direction changes, and this was already far superior to any aircraft in the hands of the Allied powers at that time. Secondly, Hitler also possessed another aircraft, close to being up and running, capable of travelling 2,500 miles per hour, which not only had the characteristics of the first aircraft, but also had an onboard laser weapon, capable of penetrating up to 4 inches of armour. Even the Bulgarian physicist Vladimir Terzitsky had publicly stated that Germany shared much of the progress in the field of armaments with its Italian allies during the war. At the Fiat experimental facility on Lake Garda, the Italians were experimenting with numerous advanced weapons, rockets and airplanes, conceived and designed in Germany. Similarly, the Germans were keeping close contact with the Japanese military establishment and were supplying it with many advanced weapons. For example, it was discovered that the best fighter in the world at the time, the German twin-prop Dornier 335, had been duplicated at the factories in Kawashima, Japan. Furthermore, the existence of occult Nazi societies involved in the development of unconventional aircraft is also known. One of these, the Vril Society, is said to channel messages from an alien civilization located in the Aldebaran solar system and plan to develop craft that could make physical contact with the civilization there. In 1934, the same year that Viktor Schauberger discussed his flying saucer ideas with Hitler, the Vril Society developed its first UFO-shaped craft, known as Vril 1, and propelled by an anti-gravity force. The Society would then continue to develop this type of aircraft until it built the RFC-2. This craft was apparently 16 feet long and featured an improved propulsion system and, for the first time, magnetic pulse guidance. Interestingly, it produced colour effects normally associated with UFOs during flight. In 1939, a group of scientists within the SS had produced the RFC-5 or Hornebu 1. In August 1939, the vehicle made its maiden flight and proved its viability, being over 65 feet in diameter and affording considerable stowage space. By the end of 1940, the RFC-2 had entered service as a reconnaissance aircraft, and there is certainly photographic evidence to support this. For example, an RFC-2 was photographed near Antarctica in 1940. From here on, a series of aircraft with an alternative design and capable of using very advanced technologies were designed. Some of these projects failed, while others were very successful. On April 17, 1945, Miethe was able to alert Hitler that the V-7 was being tested in the skies over the Baltic. This particular vehicle was a supersonic helicopter equipped with 12 BMW turbo aggregate engines. On its first test, it reached an altitude of 78,000 feet and then 80,000 feet on the second test. Mitre reported that in principle the new craft could be powered by unconventional energy sources. However, these new discoveries came too late, as the Allies and the Russians would win the war within a few months. But as soon as the war was over, phantom rockets began appearing over Scandinavia, and within 2 years, numerous flying saucers were sighted across the United States. Coincidences? After the war ended in 1945, Russian and American intelligence teams began a hunt for military and scientific loot from advanced German technology. Following the discovery of laser beam weapons on German military bases, the United States War Department decided that the United States should monitor not only this technology, but also the scientists who had helped develop it. To ensure that America take full advantage of those significant developments that are deemed vital to our national security. It then launched a top-secret project to bring these scientists to the United States. The project was called Operation Paperclip and remained classified until 1973. The thinking behind Paperclip was exemplified in a letter that Major General Hugh Nair, the Deputy Commanding General for the Administration of US Strategic Forces in Europe, wrote to Lieutenant General Karl Spaatz in March 1945. The occupation of the German scientific and industrial complexes revealed the fact that we are alarmingly behind in many fields of research. If we do not take this opportunity to take over the German military and technological apparatus and the brains that developed it, so as to put this perfect combination back to work, we will be several years behind. There was just one small problem. This was illegal, as US law explicitly forbade Nazi officials to immigrate to America. However, President Truman decided that the national interest was paramount and that America needed German scientists to work on America's behalf. Operation Paperclip was conducted by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency and had 2 objectives. The first was to exploit German scientists for American research by rounding up Nazi scientists and bringing them to America, and the second to deny these intellectual resources to the Soviet Union. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency then investigated the German scientists, and after identifying and selecting the best, in February 1947, the agency's director, Marine Captain Bosquet Wev, submitted the first set of dossiers containing information on the scientists to the state for review. All the scientists featured in these dossiers were not only members of the Nazi Party, but ardent Nazis who fully shared its ideology. The visa applications were therefore subsequently rejected. Wev was furious at this, and on April 27, 1948, he wrote to the State Department. In the light of the present situation, it is conceivable that opposition to the immigration of these scientists could lead to their falling into the hands of the Russians, who would thus acquire the valuable information and capabilities possessed by these men. Such an eventuality could have a very serious and adverse effect on the national security of the United States. In 1942, future CIA Director Alan Dulles had moved to Bern, Switzerland, as head of the Bureau of Strategic Services to negotiate with some Nazi leaders who were already convinced they would lose World War II and wanted an agreement with the United States on a possible future war with the USSR. It is here that Dulles met the Nazi intelligence leader Reinhard Gehlen and became friends with him. When Gehlen surrendered to the United States, he was taken to Fort Hunt, Virginia, where he and the US military came to an agreement. His intelligence unit would work for the United States and be funded by the United States until a new democratic German government in Germany came to power. For nearly 10 years, The Gehlen Org, as it came to be known, operated securely within the CIA and was virtually the CIA's sole source of intelligence on Eastern Europe. Then, in 1955, it evolved into the BND, the German equivalent of the CIA, and continued to cooperate with its US counterparts. Thus, the problem of the immigration of scientists was resolved. Their dossiers were cleaned by Dulles, who then merged them into the Gehlen Org, where many of these scientists worked on projects based on previous Nazi research. One of the most important scientists of Operation Paperclip was Hubertus Struckhold, later known as the Father of Space Medicine, and after whom the Aeromedical Library at the United States Air Force School of Aerospace Medicine was named in 1977. Among others were also Klaus Barbie, the so-called Butcher of Leon, Otto von Bolschwing, infamous for his activities on the Holocaust, and SS Colonel Otto Skorzeny. In 1984, Arthur Rudolph, also a prominent Paperclip member who had received NASA's 1969 Distinguished Service Award, left the United States rather than face charges as a Nazi war criminal. Another alleged former Nazi was Werner von Braun. Born March 23, 1912, von Braun became one of the world's first and foremost rocket engineers and a leading authority on space travel. In 1932, he received his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and was offered a fellowship to conduct and develop scientific investigations of liquid propulsion rocket engines. Von Braun's rocket experiments were tested at the Kummersdorf Proving Grounds, 60 miles south of Berlin, between 1932 and 1937. Kummersdorf was the launch site for two German V-2 rockets in 1934. After their launch, Braun began work on an assisted takeoff vehicle, but the Kummersdorf runway was too small for this task, so von Braun moved to Peenemünde on the Baltic coast, where he was director from 1937 to 1945. This site was then equipped with laboratories and industrial facilities to facilitate the development, production and testing of the German V-1, Vengeance Weapon 1, and V-2, Vengeance Weapon 2, rockets. It was this V-2 rocket that inflicted serious damage on England during the war. As the war entered its final year in 1945, von Braun ordered two of his men to find an abandoned mine in the Harz Mountains to hide V-2 data. Several large boxes were then placed in an open cave, and von Braun sent his younger brother Magnus on a bicycle he had borrowed from a local innkeeper to look for allies to surrender to. Von Braun and his scientific staff dutifully surrendered to the US Army, while most of the German engineers were taken prisoner by the Soviets. After entering America as part of Project Paperclip on $6 a day plus lodging at a military installation, Braun served as technical director and then head of the Redstone Arsenal Guided Missile Development Division from 1950 to 1956, while living in Huntsville, Alabama. Von Braun was later appointed director of the Army Rocket Agency's Development Operations Division, which developed the Jupiter-C rocket that would successfully launch the Western Hemisphere's first satellite, Explorer 1, on January 31, 1958, inaugurating the birth of the American space program. During the 1950s and 60s, he achieved near-celebrity status as one of Walt Disney's experts on Tomorrow's World. In 1970, he became an associate administrator of NASA, and without him, it is unlikely that the organization would ever have led man to reach the moon. Over the course of 20 years, von Braun received approximately 25 honorary degrees and accepted many other awards and medals bestowed upon him by small towns, NASA, and even President Kennedy. His dossier was apparently rewritten, so he didn't sound like an enthusiastic Nazi, and he attempted to downplay his true involvement in the Nazi Party by stating, "In 1939 I was officially asked to join the National Socialist Party because my work had attracted attention at ever higher levels. If I refused, I would have lost my life's work, or worse yet, I would have died. My party membership, therefore, has nothing to do with supporting Nazi ideology." His mentor, Hermann Oberth, also entered the United States after the war under Operation Paperclip. Born on June 25, 1894, in the Transylvanian city of Hermannstadt, Oberth is widely recognized as the founding father of modern rocketry, having published in 1923 the article that would inspire von Braun, From Rocket to Planetary Space. In 1929, he wrote a longer version, which was internationally regarded as a work of enormous scientific importance. When he was 30, Oberth took Werner von Braun as an assistant, and they worked together in Peenemünde, developing the V2 rocket. After entering the United States at the end of the war, Oberth worked again with von Braun, until Oberth retired 3 years after entering the United States, and returned to Germany, where he headed the Oberth Commission for the German government on the UFO phenomenon. Viktor Schauberger was also brought to America thanks to Operation Paperclip. Although there was no evidence that Schauberger had Nazi sympathies, he was placed in protective custody for 6 months at the end of the war. Dr. Walter Mieth and Rudolf Shriever also entered America during Operation Paperclip, while their colleague Habermal is believed to have fallen into Russian hands. While in the United States, Mieth continued his work, designing and building a flying saucer, until he moved to Canada and was hired by Avro, a Canadian aircraft manufacturing company, where he concluded the work he had started in the United States. In 1959, Jack Judges, a freelance cameraman, was flying over the Avro plant in Canada when he saw a saucer-shaped aircraft resting on the ground, and then he photographed it. After the photograph was published in newspapers, speculation grew that the disc was a secret weapon and may have accounted for many of the UFO sightings in the previous years. In response, the CIA confirmed that the aircraft was based on work done by German scientists, most notably Mieth, during World War II. The project was later abandoned in the late 1960s, with the Air Force claiming it was still in an experimental stage when it was abandoned. The 1990s revealed that the aircraft was part of Project Silver Bug, a secret project to develop an aircraft equipped with vertical takeoff and landing capabilities that would eliminate the need for runways and reduce the risks of such runways being subjected to attack. Likewise, other German scientists brought their expertise and their designs to the United States after the war. Some of them worked at Wright Field, where the remains of the alien craft that crashed in Roswell in 1947 were studied and analyzed. Among them were Rudolf Hermann, Alexander Lippisch, Heinz Schmidt, Helmut Heinrich, Fritz Dobloff, and Ernst Zundel. Hermann was assigned to the Aerodynamics Research Station at Peenemünde during the war, where German V2 rockets were fired at England. He was also a member of the group in charge of Hitler's futuristic plans to establish rocket refueling bases for space stations that orbited like satellites around the Earth. Dr. Alexander Lippisch, however, had designed another German aircraft, which at the time could be mistaken for a flying saucer. Lippisch had developed a number of designs, including the DM-1, a Delta aircraft with 60-degree sloped leading edges. This aircraft, at the end of the war, was shipped to the United States, along with its creator. The DM-1 would inspire the design of many US Delta aircraft, such as the F-102 and F-104. Lippisch joined the Collins Radio Company as an expert on aeronautical problems and in 1966 founded the Lippisch Corporation. He went on to develop the X-113A aerofoil boat before he died in 1976, at the age of 81. Another aircraft that had the shape and appearance of a flying saucer was the AS-6. This aircraft was built by Arthur Sack under the encouragement of Ernst Udet, the German Air Minister, in 1939. Built at the Mitterdeutsche Motorwerk Company and completed at Flugplatz Werstadt at Brandis Air Base in early 1944, the aircraft was unsuccessful and no longer further developed. Other aircraft at the time were unconventional in shape and appearance. In the 1930s and 1940s in Germany, the Horten brothers, Walter and Reimar, built a range of aircraft whose series they called the Ho. The first in this series, the Ho-1, was a simple wing glider aircraft. By the end of that decade, the brothers had developed the Ho-3, a metal frame glider featuring a folding bladed propeller for flight. Then, in 1944, they finished the Ho-9 prototype, their first combat-oriented design. Powered by Junkers Jumo 004B turbojets, this aircraft had a metal frame and plywood exterior. It made its maiden flight on the 2nd of February 1945, and satisfied with its performance, the Air Ministry ordered 40 of these aircraft to be built by the Goethe plant under the designation Ho-229. When the US 3rd Army Corps reached the Goethe factory on the 14th of April 1945, they took it over and shipped the nearly completed Ho-9 V3 back to the US. However, a significant number of the Nazi elite had managed to escape to hidden locations in Antarctica and South America, taking with them knowledge of advanced technology of extraterrestrial origin. This means that, contrary to the public perception of a successful end to World War II, a significant portion of Nazi Germany's most advanced technological assets and military scientific elite were beyond the reach of the victorious Allied powers. In reference to the shape of some aircraft designed and developed in the US by Third Reich scientists and engineers, it is very probable that many of the UFO sighting reports made after the war can be attributed to German US projects that were developed in great secrecy. Firstly, due to the ongoing Cold War, and secondly, the fact that most technologies were the result of work undertaken by ex-Nazi scientists who secretly and often illegally immigrated to the United States. Still, this can't explain all the sightings. So, if these unconventional but land-based aircraft can't explain many of the sightings, then what can? Without a doubt, according to many reliable sources, the German projects we have talked about so far, especially the most technologically advanced ones, were actually human attempts to reproduce real flying saucers that crashed on Earth, coming from distant planets. Attempts that often failed because the engineers and scientists involved were unable to recreate the extraterrestrial drive and propulsion systems. This theory certainly better explains the number of sightings over hundreds, if not thousands of years, and the failure of major government agencies to explain much of the activity in the skies after the war. And it's a statement supported by many authoritative figures on the world stage. One of these is Colonel Philip J. Corso, who is currently retired. Corso has published a book called The Day After Roswell. A former official reveals the US government's shocking UFO cover-up, in which he makes a series of shocking revelations. Corso's own background is formidable. He served as head of the US Army's Foreign Technology Division and also served as a member of President Eisenhower's National Security Council. He later went on to work for Senator Strom Thurmond after he retired from the military in 1963. Corso was interviewed by Michael Lindemann of CNI News on July 5, 1997. Lindemann, citing the rumours and speculation about what had happened in Roswell, namely that the US had obtained super advanced information and technologies by analysing the debris of an extraterrestrial craft, asked Corso if something like this hadn't already been experienced by the Nazis during the Second World War period, and if this wouldn't explain some of their extraordinary technological developments in the industrial and, more importantly, military fields. Corso replied as follows: "Yes, true, I had German scientists on my team. I discussed this with them. I discussed this with Oberth and von Braun. I was part of Operation Paperclip with General Trudeau. There were crashes elsewhere, and the Germans gathered material too. The Germans were working on it. They didn't solve the propulsion system. They did a lot of experiments on flying saucers. They had one that went up to 12,000 feet. But where all of us, we and they, missed out on was on the guidance system. In R&D, we began to realize that this being, a captured alien, was part of the guidance system, part of the apparatus itself." In his book, Corso also claims that the UFO that crashed in Roswell had a crescent shape that so closely resembled the German aircraft American airmen had seen late in the war that it was clear that Germans had stumbled upon something that the US was unaware of. The father of modern rocketry, Hermann Oberth, confirmed that during the war years there was a connection between Nazi Germany and extraterrestrial life, when he said, "We cannot take credit for our progress. We have been helped." When asked by whom, he replied, "By peoples from other worlds." Werner von Braun was equally frank on the matter, and didn't doubt that extraterrestrials had visited Earth, nor that many of the advances he was involved in were the result of alien technology. In fact, he spoke out on the issue following an incident on June 3, 1959, when the Discoverer 3 failed to reach orbit. "We are faced with powers that are much stronger than we have hitherto assumed, and whose origin is currently unknown to us. More I cannot say at the moment. We are now engaged in coming into closer contact with these powers, and in 6 or 9 months it may be possible to speak more precisely on the matter." From these words, it is clear that the Germans possessed superior knowledge compared to the Allies, and that once they entered the United States after the war, thanks to Operation Paperclip, they shared this knowledge with the US Army. Even though the Nazis lost World War II, they enjoyed an almost mythical reputation for high-tech weaponry. Nazi tanks were often technically superior to Allied tanks. The Luftwaffe developed fighter planes long before the Allies, and the V for Vengeance series of terrorist weapons, including the V-1 cruise missile and V-2 ballistic missile, while strategically questionable, were terrifying weapons. Speaking of this, some books and even videos explore the hypothesis that Hitler entrusted the SS with the project of a bell-shaped device, capable of travelling in space and even in time. The name of this device is Die Glocke. Rumours of the device first appeared in the 1960 book Morning of the Magicians. Die Glocke also appeared in Igor Witkowski's 2000 book Pravda o Wunderwaffe, The Truth About the Wonder Weapon, and soon after in Nick Cook's The Hunt for Zero Point. It was described as a glowing, spinning contraption that probably had some sort of anti-gravity effect, and even a time machine that was part of an anti-gravity program of the SS. Cook even floated the possibility that the infamous SS colonel Hans Kammler traded Die Glocke to the US Army in exchange for his freedom. Kammler disappeared in the closing days of World War II and was never seen again. Many believe that US forces captured Nazi scientists, and even Kammler himself, and put them to work developing Die Glocke's anti-gravity technology. This culminated in the so-called Kecksburg incident, when a bell-shaped UFO crashed outside Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in December 1965. Indeed, that night of December the 9th, 1965, a fireball was reported by citizens of 6 states of the United States and Canada over Detroit, Michigan, Windsor, and Ontario. The town of Kecksburg is even known as the Roswell of Pennsylvania. Witnesses in Kecksburg at the time said the object crashed into the woods near the small western Pennsylvania town. Today, many people believe that this was actually an optical illusion and that the object could not have landed in that area. However, at the time, the US military took the sightings very seriously. Eventually, the area was cordoned off, and citizens who went out into the woods to investigate the falling object were pushed back by armed men. The army reported that, after a search in the woods around Kecksburg, nothing was found. Witnesses dispute this claim. Bill Bullbush, a local resident, says he saw the object spin in the sky as if it was being controlled, before crashing into the woods. Intrigued, he went to investigate and found a 10-foot-long, acorn-shaped object burning in the woods. The way it glowed, cracked, and lit up scared Bullbush, who says he didn't get too close to the object, and, when he heard people coming, ran home. James Romansky saw it too. The man was one of a group of volunteer firefighters who came across the object in the woods while they were responding to what they thought was a plane crash. Instead, they found a mysterious metal object buried in the ground and covered with hieroglyphics. He claims that he was then ordered to leave by mysterious men in trench coats, and that later he saw the military take the item away in a flatbed truck. Additionally, Michael Rambacher, an Air Force security officer, said that he himself guarded the object on the flatbed truck, and that he didn't believe it was an out-of-this-world object. Proof is always coming forth. If anything, deciphering what really happened has only gotten more confusing and complex. However, the cases of sightings are more and more numerous, and this would seem to lead to a single conclusion: we are not alone in the universe.